Well, before the break, we heard the story of how a baseball caused cardiac arrest in a boy at bat. A scary situation that probably happens more often in sports than we know.
Yeah, and one injury we've been hearing so much about recently is concussions and their link to football. And we've been talking about it a lot on the show because there's so much research being done to understand the injury and how it impacts an athlete and athletes of all ages, really. And that's where baseline testing can play a role. Now, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say baseline testing is a pre-season exam used to assess an athlete's balance and brain function, such as learning and memory skills. Now, the CDC says by comparing post-injury test results to the baseline test results, healthcare professionals can better determine the effects of the injury and when the athlete is able to return to play. Now, it's baseline testing that helped determine when high school football player Justin Singh had healed enough to get back on the field after he suffered a concussion.
We were happy to have something like that. Being able to know that there was some kind of a test that was monitoring that, or if he got injured, could tell, what it would take to get back to where he was when he started.
Unfortunately, Justin had to quit football because he was having headaches and was having trouble concentrating. Now we're learning more about the body post-head injury. Research shows that the healing process after a concussion for young athletes takes longer than it does for adults. That's why many see baseline testing as a must. However, since Justin's injury, the high school has done away with the test, a move that upset the athletic director.
How important in your eyes is it?
Oh, I think it's a must-have.
And the CDC says some baseline concussion assessment tools are only recommended for athletes ages 10 and older.
Well, Sean, it seems like we're learning more and more every day about these head injuries and the impact they can have on the body. But perhaps one of the main things we're discovering about the human brain and concussions is just how much scientists still don't know.
Number 32 on 3rd down and 6. Cobb in trouble, gets ready. Oh, big hit on Deshaun Jackson.
From the pros to high school to the local Pee Wee League, football is all about taking the hit. And while everyone is talking about concussions these days, there are still more questions and answers. We just don't know that much about brains.
That's completely true, and particularly with concussions, we know almost nothing, which is why.
Dr. Patrick Bellgowan is part of a brain research team that is studying the effects of concussions. Unfortunately, what they're finding is that even relatively mild brain injuries can have devastating consequences.
We didn't actually see it happen.
Kendra Britton's son Tyler was just 13 years old when he was hit in the head during a kickoff in a middle school football game.
I remember thinking I'll just dive for it, so it looks cool or something like that.
And then just minutes later was put back into play, a combination now known to be extremely dangerous.
We went back to school. His memory was failing him. He was forgetting homework at home. He was forgetting in his locker. The teachers were yelling at him.
And the symptoms didn't stop there.
6 months goes by and he's still having problems, and he's crying a lot. He's very emotional. He's suicidal. He's just, and we don't know how to handle it.
While Tyler's case was exceptionally severe, his symptoms are consistent with the early findings of a study on one group of college football players, which found changes in the area of the brain that controls memory and emotion, the hippocampus.
And what we found were that college football players had smaller hippocampi regardless if they had a history of concussion or not.
And Dr. Bellgowan has another alarming statistic. 10% of the kids who suffer just one concussion have a risk, like Tyler, of suffering long-term effects. But Dr. Bellgowan says it's not just football, it's anything that results in repetitive head hits. However it happens, Dr. Bellgowan has witnessed the consequences.
What we see often, and it's really sad, are you see 15, 16-year-old kids who have light problems, have sound problems, and have headaches every day, who cry for no particular reason.
It's called post-concussion syndrome. 4 years later, Tyler is still suffering the effects of his concussion.
Sometimes I'll have like a migraine where it's on both sides of my head and it doesn't go away at all.
That's the kind of kid that I've always said really needs to be shown to the public. This is the effect that is a very small proportion, but this is the risk that you're risking.
And Dr. Bellgowan does believe that football has a solid future, and it's largely because of changes being initiated by the NFL itself. Now, you may recall over the last year, the league really toughened its protocols for players who suffer concussions.
Yeah, but they're not the only changes to try to make the sport safer. Technology is also playing a major role, particularly when it comes to football helmets. For instance, this one has a special shock bonnet inside the helmet. It's designed to lessen the impact of a hit. But there's another method for keeping players safe, and it's using a state-of-the-art gadget to let coaches know when a player may have had enough.
It's 30 minutes to kickoff, also known as countdown to contact for this high school football team. Players are wearing their usual black helmets, but inside those helmets is something new.
When it blinks green, that means it's fully charged and ready to go.
Head coach Sean McMenomy has a new pregame ritual, installing what are called head case impact sensors inside his players' helmets.
What it does is that it holds a file folder with every hit that kid has always had.
Using 3M tape, the sensor is placed between the hard plastic of the helmet. The sensor is connected to a phone app that notifies coaches every time a player takes a big hit. The sensor measures the G-force of every hit to the helmet, from light taps to big collisions. And if the hit is big enough, the sensor lets the coaches know.
What it does is just helps us monitor big hits and say, hey, you know what, Steve just got just took a big hit to his head. Pull him off to the side, and it's, just check him out just in case.
The player can be put through the baseline test on the app to see if they have a concussion, and it's all recorded as part of their injury history.
Concussions is big, we try to keep away from it, and that's why this thing can help us a lot,
It can help them literally keep their heads in the game.
This, I think, is just another step where it helps monitor the amount of hits that your head takes, and I think it long term, it only helps.
And right now, the company is still testing the units with various schools, and they're expected to be on the market in the spring. But there is a similar method that is already being used by some colleges. Basically, you pull the liner from the helmet, and then you place sensors inside. You then replace the lining and the padding back in the helmet, and there's a transmitter that tracks hits to the head. It lets coaches and even parents know if a player took a hard hit. And that sensor sells for about $150, but that's some pretty neat technology.
Well worth it, I'm sure. And while we're talking safety, another thing to keep in mind is the weight of the helmet. At a little over 2 pounds, the newer SG helmet is less than half the weight of the popular Riddell helmet. NOCSE, the committee that sets standards for athletic equipment, recently came out and said that for 95% of kids, their helmets are too heavy. And you can see how a heavy helmet can keep the head moving after a player is tackled. Call it the bobblehead effect. But experts say a lighter helmet reduces the momentum of the entire head and the brain. NOCSE conducts helmet drop tests that simulate football hits. The tests require 1,200 pass or fail score. The lower the number, the better. NOCSE won't release helmet manufacturer scores, but a graduate student tested 2 youth helmets. The Riddell 360 scored 752, while the SG helmet scored 359. Bill Simpson is known for his developments with safety and auto racing. He invented the fire suit and the helmets that keep drivers alive. He's pushing for a standard when it comes to youth helmets. Now, right now, there is none. So we not only have to be smart when it comes to our kids and sports, but when they're behind the wheel as well. Up next on Delmarva Life, we'll learn about one program aimed to help keep your teen drivers safe, plus how it may keep mom and dad calm. We'll also hear the truth behind those hands-free devices. Are they really a safer option when driving?
And later, I think it is safe to say you're going to love this dish. We're in the kitchen making beer mussels. Delmarva Life. We'll be right back.